Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The night the vampire fell ***. The city was alive with the hum of distant traffic, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across narrow alleys. It was the kind of night that felt endless, the air thick with anticipation as if the world was holding its breath. Beneath the glow of the moon, the streets were nearly deserted. Only the occasional figure, hooded or cloaked, ventured out as if they too could sense the coming storm. Seraphine had walked these streets for centuries. She knew every corner, every crack in the pavement, every hidden place where secrets could be kept. But tonight everything felt different. The pull of the night was heavier, the shadows darker, and the sensation of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. Something was coming, something she couldn't see but could feel in her very bones. It had been years since Seraphine had allowed herself to truly indulge in the thrill of the hunt. The life of a vampire was, at its core, one of constant restraint, a struggle to maintain control. She had once been a creature of the night, a predator feared by all who crossed her path. But those days felt distant now, a lifetime ago, when the world was simpler and her desires more easily satisfied. But with the passing of the years came something more dangerous, a longing for something she couldn't quite name, a yearning for something deeper than blood and death. Seraphine paused at the edge of the alley, her sharp eyes scanning the empty street. The feeling had grown stronger now, an undeniable presence, a force gathering just out of sight. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts. And tonight they were screaming at her to be on guard. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall and cloaked in darkness. It moved with purpose, silent but with a presence that demanded attention. Seraphine's pulse quickened, not from fear but from something else. Curiosity. Intrigue. She hadn't felt this way in years. The figure came closer, the streetlights catching the glint of something sharp and dangerous. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. There was something distinctly human about the figure. But there was also something more. Something that felt different. And then, as if sensing her presence, the figure stopped. "You're not from around here," a deep voice rumbled from beneath the hood. The voice was rich and smooth, but there was a hard edge to it, like a blade sheathed in velvet. Seraphine tilted her head, her lips curling into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "You could say that," she replied, her voice low, but with an undeniable edge of power. She wasn't a creature of habit anymore, not the vampire who hunted without remorse. She had become something different over the years. But this man, this stranger, was something else entirely. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a pair of dark, piercing eyes that met hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His features were sharp, his jawline strong, and there was something unmistakably dangerous in the way he carried himself. He was human, no doubt, but the way he moved, like he knew the streets better than she did, suggested something more. Something that made her question whether he was the hunter or the hunted. "You can see me," Seraphine said, her voice rising slightly in disbelief. Most humans couldn't. She had learned long ago to avoid being noticed by them. They were fragile, weak, and had no place in her world. The man took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been watching you," he said simply. The words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. He had been watching her? That was impossible. She had been careful, so careful. Yet here he was, standing before her, knowing exactly who she was. "Why?" she asked, her voice tight with curiosity and a hint of warning. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of recognition, one that knew far more than it should. "What I want is simple," he said, his voice steady. "I want to see if you're still the same." Seraphine's brow furrowed, her instincts flaring. Something about this man unsettled her. No one had ever dared speak to her this way, especially not someone so human. Vampires had long ruled the night, and their kind had few equals in the shadows. Yet here he was, so calmly challenging her existence. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, stepping closer, her voice laced with power. She could feel the sharp edge of her fangs beneath her lips, the hunger that had been so carefully held at bay for so long beginning to stir once more. The man nodded slowly as though he had been expecting this. "I know exactly who you are, Seraphine. And I know what you've become." The name struck her like a blow to the chest. She had not heard it in centuries. No one called her that anymore. No one dared. Her old name, her true name, was a relic of a past she had long buried, forgotten beneath layers of carefully crafted reinvention. But this man, this stranger knew it. And that fact, more than anything else, made Seraphine's blood run cold. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice sharp now, the power within her starting to surge. The hunt was old, a reflex that never truly faded. She didn't like being caught off guard, and she didn't like people knowing things about her that no one else did. The man smiled again, a faint glint of something mischievous in his eyes. "Let's just say I'm someone who can offer you something you might need. Something you've been searching for." Seraphine's mind raced. What could he possibly mean? The world had changed over the years. She had changed. The bloodthirsty predator she had once been was now tempered by centuries of caution and survival. But even so, she had always sought something more. A purpose, a reason for her existence beyond the endless cycle of feeding and hiding. "Why would I need anything from you?" she asked, her tone turning cool, though the heat of her curiosity simmered beneath the surface. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because I know you're not what you appear to be anymore, Seraphine," he said, his voice low and compelling. "And I think it's time you faced the truth of what you really are." Seraphine's pulse quickened, the blood in her veins thrumming with an unfamiliar rhythm. She had lived for so long in the shadows, in control of everything, manipulating the world around her to fit her needs. But now, in front of this man, it was as though the very ground beneath her feet was shifting. She could feel something, a force, beginning to stir within her, something ancient and primal. "What are you offering?" she asked, her voice a whisper, almost afraid of what the answer might be. The man's eyes sparkled with something like amusement. "I'm offering you a choice," he said. "A chance to embrace who you truly are, to step into the world you've always avoided. Or, you can continue running, hiding from what you've become. It's your decision, Seraphine." And with that, the stranger stepped back into the shadows, his presence lingering long after he had disappeared. Seraphine stood alone on the street, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of his words settling heavily upon her. She had always believed herself in control, always careful, always distant from the world around her. But now, in the wake of this encounter, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she knew was about to change. The night was still too still. And somewhere, deep inside her, Seraphine knew that the darkness wasn't done with her yet. The man had spoken of a choice, but she couldn't help but wonder if she had any real power over the fate he had set in motion. For the first time in centuries, Seraphine felt uncertain. And it terrified her. The aftermath ***. The darkness of the room clung to Seraphine's senses as she slowly regained awareness. The faint scent of incense, mingled with something metallic and faintly herbal, made her stomach churn in unfamiliar discomfort. Her body felt heavy as if she'd been drugged, though she knew she hadn't been. It was the weight of her own power, her senses dulled from whatever strange force had rendered her unconscious. As her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, she saw the shadows of old furniture, bookshelves lined with ancient tomes, a leather armchair, and a small table cluttered with papers and a candle flickering weakly in the corner. She was in a room that seemed too mundane for someone like her. Someone who was meant to live in the moonlit world of shadows and blood, not among the ordinary smells and textures of human life. But it wasn't the room that held her attention, it was him. The man who had defeated her, who had spared her life. He stood across from her, arms crossed, leaning casually against the doorframe as though it was entirely normal for him to be facing down a vampire in his own home. He hadn't even broken a sweat. "You're awake," he said, his voice carrying the slight edge of amusement. Seraphine pushed herself upright, feeling the stiff ache in her limbs as she did so. For a brief moment she looked around the room, noting the lack of windows. No escape. She could have fled in an instant, but something about the way he'd captured her interest, something she couldn't quite place, made her hesitate. She straightened her back and fixed him with an icy glare. "Why didn't you finish me off?" Her voice was hoarse, tinged with frustration and disbelief. "You had every chance to kill me." Marcus shrugged, his expression nonchalant. "You weren't the one I was after. Not yet anyway. And frankly, I wasn't planning on leaving you to die in some alley. That's not how I work." He pushed himself off the doorframe and stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The tension between them was thick, as though something unspoken simmered beneath the surface. Seraphine wanted to lash out, to snap his neck as easily as she'd done to others over the centuries, but something in her hesitated. The memory of her own vulnerability, the confusion and weakness she had felt as he subdued her, kept her in check. "You saved me," she muttered, more to herself than to him. Marcus gave a low chuckle, crossing his arms over his chest. "That's one way to put it. I don't know what you'd call it, but I wasn't about to let you turn into a pile of ash just because of a couple of slashes. You've got some fight left in you." I could feel it. The phrase hung in the air and Seraphine frowned. This man, This human was far more perceptive than she'd first assumed. "You think I needed saving?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "You have no idea what you're dealing with?" "You're right, I don't. But I know enough not to make assumptions. You're not like the others." "I can see it in your eyes," he said, his tone more thoughtful now. "There's more to you, Seraphine." Her breath caught at the sound of her name on his lips, and she felt an unanticipated shiver run down her spine. For all her centuries of existence, her name had never sounded so human when spoken aloud by a mortal. "Why did you help me?" Her question was more of a demand now, the edge of suspicion in her voice sharp as a blade. Marcus didn't flinch. "Because you didn't deserve to die. You're not just some monster, some bloodsucker to be disposed of like everyone else seems to think. And because you owe me now." Seraphine blinked in surprise. "Owe you?" The words felt foreign in her mouth. Vampires didn't owe anyone. They were creatures who took what they wanted, when they wanted, with no regard for anyone's debts. "Yep," Marcus replied with a smirk. "I'm calling in a favor. You saved my life in your own way, now it's your turn." She recoiled slightly. "What kind of favor are we talking about?" He raised an eyebrow, leaning forward with an almost teasing grin. "Let's just say there's an old tradition. One that you, of all people, should be familiar with. The rite of first night?" Seraphine's eyes narrowed. The phrase felt as if it were a curse on her tongue. Rite of first night. It was an ancient custom, one so old that many of her kind had forgotten it. The tradition required that the one saved by a vampire offer the vampire a favor in return, on the night they were first saved. The nature of the favor could vary depending on the circumstances, but it was often a symbolic gesture. Sometimes it was a ritual of power, other times a commitment. It was a bond, one that had deep, unspoken implications. The idea was laughable. It wasn't just a human custom, it was beneath her, an immortal being who had walked the earth since the rise and fall of empires. And yet here she was, in a situation she hadn't anticipated, facing a human who was holding her to that very tradition. "I should have killed you the moment you touched me," she hissed, her fangs flashing dangerously as her temper flared. Marcus didn't seem fazed by her outburst. Instead, he met her gaze with unwavering confidence. "You're welcome to try. But you owe me a debt, Seraphine. And I'm cashing in. You'll do what I ask." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Seraphine could hear the rapid beat of her own heart, her pulse pounding in her ears as her mind raced. She had no intention of letting this human get the better of her. She had survived for centuries, she was not about to become some plaything to a mortal, no matter how bold he seemed. "I will not be manipulated by you," she said through gritted teeth, her voice low and dangerous. "I am no one's puppet." Marcus's smile faltered, but only for a second before he regained his composure. "I never said you were. I just want what's mine. You've got power. I've got a proposal." "A proposal?" Seraphine scoffed. "What could you possibly offer me in exchange for what you want?" Marcus stepped back, his eyes glinting with a mixture of mirth and challenge. "I think you'll find it's more than you expect. But you'll have to trust me for that." "Trust you?" She laughed bitterly. "I don't trust anyone." "Then we're in the same boat." He shrugged, almost as if the entire situation were just a casual arrangement to him. "But whether you like it or not, you've got a debt to settle. And I'm not going anywhere." The words hung in the air like a dark promise, and for the first time, Seraphine wasn't sure whether she had made a mistake in underestimating this human or if, somehow, he had underestimated her. As the silence stretched, she wondered if she was about to make a choice that would bind them both in a way neither could escape. A deal with the devil ***. Seraphine lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling as the quiet hum of Marcus's home filled the space around her. She should have been resting, recovering from the injuries sustained during their first encounter, but her mind wouldn't allow her to relax. It kept spinning, caught on one thought: the debt. The rite of first night. The idea of owing someone, let alone a mere human, seethed at her pride. She who had lived for centuries, who had hunted and survived, had been saved by a man she barely knew. Worse, he had invoked the ancient tradition, a ritual that required repayment. The absurdity of it all gnawed at her. She sat up abruptly, the cool sheets falling away as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. There was a time when her kind ruled with no such rules or customs, when blood and power were the only currency that mattered. A time before humans had developed these convoluted ideas of debt and obligation. But here she was, in the home of one such human, bound to him by an ancient custom. The thought repulsed her. But what choice did she have? As her fangs extended involuntarily, she growled low in frustration. Marcus had been watching her from the doorway again, as if anticipating her unrest. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed over his chest, a casual grin playing at the corner of his lips. "I can feel the anger radiating off you, you know," he said, his tone light and teasing. "It's kind of impressive." Seraphine narrowed her eyes at him, a flash of red burning in her gaze. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, human. You think I'll just follow this ridiculous tradition like a trained pet?" Marcus's grin widened and he stepped into the room, making no effort to hide his amusement. "I never said you were a pet. Just that you owe me. And I've got a proposal for you." "I'm listening," Seraphine said through gritted teeth, her patience fraying at the edges. He straightened, clearly pleased that she hadn't dismissed him outright. "I think we can make this whole debt thing work to both our advantage," he said. "You're not the only one with power, Seraphine. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve as well. Tricks I can teach you." She raised an eyebrow. "You're going to teach me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Oh, I have an idea," Marcus said, stepping closer with the same calm confidence. "You've been hiding your abilities, but they're still there. And I can help you harness them. Maybe even make you stronger." Seraphine's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized him. She had lived too long to trust anyone's promises of power. Yet, something about his unwavering certainty made her pause. Was he simply a fool, or was there something more to this human than met the eye? "What makes you think I would ever agree to your terms?" she demanded. He shrugged, unfazed. "Because you have no other choice. You're a fighter, but you're wounded. You're not as untouchable as you once were. I'm offering you a way to get back to your peak. All I want in exchange is what's mine." The audacity of him almost made Seraphine laugh. He was suggesting an alliance, a partnership. He, a mere human, believed he could teach her something. Teach a vampire how to become more powerful. "You think you can make me stronger?" she asked incredulously. "You think you can teach me something 1,000 years of existence hasn't already taught me?" Marcus met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not promising a quick fix. But I can offer you something your centuries haven't, knowledge. Knowledge that could change everything for you." Seraphine stood abruptly, her vampire speed a blur as she closed the distance between them. She stared down at him, a full head taller, her eyes glowing dangerously. "I have knowledge beyond your comprehension. And I'll have you know, humans like you rarely live long enough to even grasp the edges of true power." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Marcus's face for a moment, but it disappeared just as quickly. His expression turned serious. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely. I'm asking for a chance to prove it. I know what you are capable of. You don't have to accept my offer, but I guarantee that without me you're not going to get any stronger. You'll only get weaker." Seraphine stiffened. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? She could go on alone, continue to hide in the shadows and avoid being hunted, but she would always be on the defensive. Time was catching up with her, she could feel it in her bones. If she refused Marcus's offer, she could risk falling into irrelevance, a relic of a bygone era, gradually fading into the nothingness of history. And yet, to accept his terms was to relinquish a part of her pride, to acknowledge that there were things in the world she could not conquer alone. But the promise of power, of knowledge that could change everything, gnawed at her. She had spent so long existing in the shadows, in her own isolation. The possibility of learning, of becoming something greater, was too tempting to ignore. "Fine," she said, her voice low but firm. "You want me to owe you? You want me to learn from you? Then let's see what you have to offer. But understand this. If you try to control me, if you attempt to bind me in any way, I will tear you apart." The following days were filled with an intensity Seraphine had never expected from a human. Marcus didn't waste time, diving into his strange form of training. While he wasn't a vampire, he had a keen understanding of their kind, and he pushed her to explore the depths of her abilities, forcing her to confront powers she had long ignored or suppressed. He even introduced her to strange rituals, ancient techniques used by the most powerful humans to tap into the primal forces of life. At first, Seraphine resisted. She balked at the idea that this human could teach her anything. But as the days wore on, she found herself growing intrigued. Marcus's methods were unconventional, but they were effective. He didn't ask her to bend to his will. He asked her to unlock something she'd kept buried for centuries. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Seraphine found herself standing alone on the rooftop of Marcus's apartment, looking out over the city. The night air was thick with the scent of rain and something else, something distant but familiar. A power she hadn't felt in years. She closed her eyes, focusing on that power. It wasn't Marcus's techniques alone that had sparked it, it was her own dormant potential, awakened by his insistence. You're not as strong as you think you are, Seraphine, Marcus's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood behind her, his presence steady and grounded. But you could be. You just have to let go. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. For the first time she saw him not as a human, not as a mere mortal, but as an ally. A powerful ally in his own right. I'll let you train me, she said, her voice carrying a note of finality. But you're not the one in control here, Marcus. Not yet. He smiled as if he knew this moment would come. I don't need to be in control, Seraphine. I'm just here to help you become who you were always meant to be. For the first time in a long while, Seraphine felt something stir inside her. Not just the hunger, but something deeper. Something more dangerous. Something she hadn't felt in centuries. The journey they were about to take would change both of their lives forever. But one thing was certain. No matter where it led, it would be a battle neither of them would ever forget. Secrets unveiled ***. The days began to blur together as Seraphine pushed herself through Marcus's unrelenting training. The human was more resourceful than she could have ever imagined, guiding her through strange rituals and forgotten techniques that stretched the boundaries of her vampire abilities. But with each passing day, Seraphine found herself confronting more than just physical limitations. The training uncovered cracks in her centuries-old mindset, forcing her to confront aspects of herself she'd long buried. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, her mind racing with the things Marcus had said to her, things she hadn't wanted to hear. She had thought herself untouchable, above the petty struggles of mortals. But Marcus was showing her that there were ways to harness powers she had long neglected, and ways to grow stronger. Tonight, however, things were different. Seraphine stood by the window of Marcus's apartment, looking out at the city below. It was raining again, the rhythmic tapping against the glass a soft contrast to the storm brewing inside her. She could feel the pull of something deep within her, something that felt foreign. It wasn't the familiar ache of hunger she had long learned to ignore, it was something else. Her mind flashed back to Marcus's words earlier that evening. You're not just a predator, Seraphine, he had said, his tone almost serious for once. You're a creature of power, but there's more to it than just strength. You've forgotten the other half of what you are. And that's what you've been running from. Seraphine's fingers brushed against the cold glass of the window, her thoughts swirling. She didn't understand what Marcus was trying to teach her. She wasn't some ethereal being, nor was she some ancient force of nature. She was a vampire, a creature bound to the earth, to blood, and to shadows. That was the only truth she had ever known. Yet his words echoed in her mind like a constant whisper, urging her to see beyond the veil. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned, her body instinctively tensing as she prepared for whatever new challenge Marcus would throw her way. Seraphine? His voice was soft, almost hesitant. Can we talk? She didn't answer immediately, her eyes narrowing as she considered the situation. Marcus had been a puzzle since the moment they met, but lately something in his behavior had shifted. There was a seriousness to him now that hadn't been there before, an undercurrent of urgency in his words and actions. As much as she hated to admit it, she was beginning to wonder if he was holding something back. With a deep sigh, she crossed the room and opened the door. Marcus stood there, looking slightly out of breath, his eyes intent on her as if he were bracing for something. What's this about? Seraphine asked, her voice cold. I think it's time we discussed what you've been hiding, he said bluntly. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. She had been hiding nothing. Hadn't she? What are you talking about? She replied, trying to keep the edge from creeping into her voice. She didn't want him to see her unease. Marcus stepped inside without waiting for her invitation, his eyes never leaving hers. You know exactly what I mean, Seraphine. You've been dodging something. I can feel it. Seraphine stepped back, her heart pounding. I'm not hiding anything from you. You've been teaching me everything you know, haven't you? His gaze hardened and he took another step forward. You've been teaching yourself. But you're holding something back. I can feel it, there's a power inside you that you refuse to acknowledge. The question is why? She crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. You've been reading too much into things. I've been through enough in my life to know what I'm capable of. I don't need anyone telling me what I can or can't do. Marcus's eyes softened, but only slightly. It's not about what you can or can't do. It's about what you're willing to confront. You're afraid, Seraphine? She flinched, but immediately masked the reaction, raising her chin in defiance. Afraid? Of what? I've lived through centuries of darkness and bloodshed. Fear is a luxury I don't have. He took a slow, measured step closer, his voice low and firm. Then why are you still hiding from the truth of what you are? You're more than just a vampire. You know it. You've always known it. Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. The words hit too close to home. She had tried to ignore the truth for so long, burying it deep inside her. She had denied it for years, pretending that the bloodlust and her relentless search for survival were all there was to her existence. But somewhere deep down she had always known there was more. You don't understand, she said quietly, her eyes averted as she turned away from him. You think I don't know the truth about myself? You think I haven't been to the depths of my own soul? You're wrong, Marcus. You don't know what it means to live for so long, to watch everything fade away, to lose your sense of self. Marcus's gaze softened, and he stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm not asking you to lose yourself, Seraphine. I'm asking you to find yourself. To remember what you were before the world made you this way. Seraphine jerked away from his touch, her body tense with the unfamiliar vulnerability his words had stirred. Don't touch me, she snapped, her voice cold. You have no idea what I've seen. What I've done. You don't know the things I've had to become in order to survive. I know enough, he said quietly, his voice steady. And I know you're stronger than this. But you'll never unlock that strength if you keep hiding from it. Her eyes burned with the weight of centuries of pain, and she clenched her fists to hold herself together. I've hidden from nothing, she spat, her tone sharp. I've survived. That's what matters. Not your ideas of what I could be. Marcus didn't back down, his eyes unwavering. And that's why you're still trapped. You think survival is all there is, but there's more, Seraphine. There's so much more. For the first time since meeting him, Seraphine felt a flicker of something other than rage or frustration. It was something unsettling, something foreign. Oh. The word felt alien in her mind. She had lived for so long without it, but Marcus was offering something she had never truly considered. A chance to be more than just a survivor. A chance to rediscover the power she had buried beneath layers of fear and resentment. But was she ready to face it? Was she ready to confront the truth of what she really was? Before she could answer, Marcus spoke again, his voice soft but insistent. I don't know if you're ready for this, Seraphine. But if you want to live beyond the cage you've built for yourself, you have to trust me. Let me show you what I see in you. She stared at him, her heart pounding as the weight of his words settled into her chest. It was a choice she had to make, one that would define not just her future but everything she had come to understand about herself. Could she allow herself to be something greater than a vampire? Could she embrace the power that Marcus insisted was lying dormant inside her? The rain continued to fall as Marcus stood silently beside her, the night stretching on. For the first time, Seraphine felt like she was standing on the edge of something monumental. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was no longer the same woman who had first crossed paths with Marcus. And that terrified her. But it also exhilarated her. Unveiling the power ***. The silence between Marcus and Seraphine felt like the calm before a storm. It was as if time itself had stopped in the wake of her quiet admission. The rain outside, once a constant rhythm against the windows, now seemed distant, muted by the tension that hung between them. For the first time since their strange alliance had begun, Seraphine felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stood by her side, his presence as steady and unwavering as ever. But Seraphine knew deep down that he was waiting. Waiting for her to take the first step toward whatever lay beyond the darkness she had wrapped herself in for centuries. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and when she opened them again she knew she couldn't go back. There was no more hiding, no more running from the truth. She had already made her choice. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper but steady. Marcus's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile, his eyes glimmering with something almost like relief. Now we begin, he said, his tone soft but resolute. Now we awaken what's inside you. For a moment, Seraphine felt a wave of doubt, the lingering fear that she might not be ready, that perhaps she wasn't meant to be more than what she had always been. But those doubts were quickly swept away by something else. The faintest spark of excitement. There was a strange pull deep within her, as if the earth itself were calling her back to her origins. The power Marcus spoke of, the dormant strength that lay hidden inside her, was waking, stretching like a beast roused from a long sleep. She had spent centuries trying to ignore it, to suppress it, but now there was no avoiding it. It was time to confront her true nature. Let's do it, she said, her voice stronger now, the old uncertainty replaced by something sharper, more purposeful. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. I'll take you to a place where you can connect with that power, he said. A place that's not bound by the rules of the world you know. Seraphine tilted her head, intrigued. A place? You're not talking about some kind of ritual, are you? He chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. Not a ritual, not exactly. Think of it as a gateway. A way to open yourself up to what's inside. Seraphine followed Marcus without another word, stepping into the hallway and through the narrow corridor that led to a door at the far end. The door opened into a small room that seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't quite place. The walls were covered with symbols, ancient markings that seemed familiar but foreign at the same time. They looked like something out of a dream, something she had seen in the farthest reaches of her memory. What is this place? Seraphine asked, her voice barely above a murmur. A sanctum, Marcus replied, his tone reverent. A place where you can confront your true self. And where you can connect with the power that's been dormant for so long. He stepped into the room and Seraphine followed, her instincts on high alert. The air was thick with something, an electric charge that seemed to hum through her veins. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, waiting for the ground to give way beneath her. Marcus gestured to the center of the room, where a small circle of light shone on the floor, illuminating an intricate pattern of symbols and runes. Step into the circle, he instructed. Close your eyes. Focus on your connection to everything around you, the earth, the air, the blood in your veins. Let it all flow through you. Seraphine hesitated for a moment, but only for a moment. There was no more time to second-guess herself. With a deep breath, she stepped into the center of the circle, the light enveloping her like a warm embrace. She closed her eyes, pushing aside the doubts that had once clung to her like a shadow. The air seemed to thrum with an unfamiliar energy, a force that pulsed and vibrated in her very bones. At first, it was gentle, a subtle current beneath the surface. But as she focused, it began to grow, surging through her, filling the empty spaces inside her that she hadn't even known existed. Her mind raced, overwhelmed by the intensity of the sensation. The power she had kept locked away for centuries was awakening, stretching and reaching for something more. She felt it, raw, primal, ancient. It was a power that didn't belong to the vampire world alone. This was something deeper. Something older. The world around her faded as she became attuned to the pulse of the energy. It wasn't just the physical, she could feel the heartbeat of the earth itself, the shifting of forces that govern the balance of life and death. The hunger that had always burned inside her, the need for blood and survival began to subside, replaced by something else. Something stronger. A voice echoed in her mind, Marcus's voice, but somehow not. You're not just a creature of the night. You are part of something much larger. Let it in. Let it guide you. She didn't know how, but she did. She let go of her fears, of the walls she had built around herself for centuries. She allowed the power to wash over her, to flood every fiber of her being. And then it happened. Her senses exploded into overdrive. Her vision sharpened, the world around her appearing in vivid detail. She could see the smallest movements in the air, the slightest change in the environment. The blood that coursed through her veins felt like fire, surging through her with the force of 1,000 storms. But there was something else. Something greater. She could feel the forces of life and death coiling around her, like ancient serpents winding through time. She felt connected to them in a way she had never experienced before. The boundaries between herself and the world around her seemed to blur, dissolving into a unified whole. It was overwhelming. And intoxicating. Seraphine's breath quickened as she opened her eyes, staring at Marcus, who stood at the edge of the circle, watching her with an unreadable expression. I can feel it, she whispered, her voice thick with awe and disbelief. It's more than I thought. I'm part of everything. Marcus nodded, his eyes gleaming. You're more than just a predator, Seraphine. You're a force of nature. And now you can wield that power. She took a tentative step out of the circle, her body humming with the new energy coursing through her. The room felt smaller now, as if she had expanded beyond its walls. She felt infinite, unstoppable. But beneath the awe, a part of her was terrified. This power was unlike anything she had ever known. It was ancient. It was dangerous. And it was all hers to command, or to lose. What now? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. For the next few days, Marcus continued to guide her, helping her refine her control over the power she had unleashed. It was not easy. The energy inside her was wild, unpredictable, and at times, it threatened to overwhelm her completely. But with each passing day, Seraphine grew stronger. The bond between them deepened, and for the first time in centuries she felt like she was truly alive. Alive in a way she had never imagined. But even as she reveled in her newfound strength, she knew that this was only the beginning. The path ahead would not be without its dangers. There were forces in the world, both human and supernatural, that would stop at nothing to harness the power she now possessed. And Seraphine would do whatever it took to ensure that she controlled her destiny. The price of power ***. Seraphine stood at the edge of a crumbling rooftop, the wind whipping through her hair, the city below her a sprawling mass of lights and shadows. The power inside her still hummed, restless and alive, just beneath the surface. It was a force she had once feared, a force that had nearly consumed her. But now, as it pulsed through her, she could feel its full extent. She had learned to control it, to direct it, but something gnawed at her. Something was still missing. Marcus had been by her side throughout the journey, guiding her through the intricacies of her newfound abilities. But now, for the first time, she found herself standing alone with her thoughts. The exhilaration of her transformation had begun to fade, replaced by a hollow ache. It wasn't enough. Her gaze fixed on the horizon. The moon hung high, a pale sentinel in the night sky, its light casting long shadows over the city. She knew the world was shifting beneath her feet. The power she had awakened was not just hers to wield, it was a living thing, something ancient that had always been a part of her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. But what was the price of wielding that power? She had already paid for centuries with her isolation, but this felt different. It wasn't just her soul that had been altered. There was something deeper at play, something she couldn't yet grasp. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Marcus had been there every step of the way, and she had come to recognize the sound of his movements even in the darkest hours. "Seraphine," he called softly, his voice carrying over the wind. She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing as she took in his expression. His face was unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture, a quiet urgency that told her something had changed. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. She had learned that Marcus only sought her out when something was important, when something needed her attention. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking to the city below them. "I think it's time you understand the cost of what you've unlocked." Seraphine's chest tightened. She had been expecting something like this, had known, deep down, that there was more to this power than what Marcus had told her. But hearing it from him made it all the more real. "The cost?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "What do you mean?" Marcus sighed, stepping closer. "The power you've awakened, it's not without its consequences. It's not something you can control without paying a price. And if you're not careful, that price could be more than you're willing to give." Seraphine frowned, crossing her arms as she looked away from him. "I've already paid enough, Marcus. Centuries of my life. My humanity. What more is there?" "There's more than you realize," Marcus replied softly, his eyes dark with something unspoken. "The power you've tapped into, it doesn't belong to the vampire world. It's older than that. It's ancient and it comes with its own rules. Rules that you'll need to understand if you want to survive this." Seraphine's pulse quickened. The weight of his words hung in the air, pressing down on her like a physical force. She had always known that power had a cost, but to hear him speak of it in such grave terms sent a shiver down her spine. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "What kind of rules?" Marcus hesitated for a long moment, his expression troubled. "It's not just about control, Seraphine. It's about balance. This power, this connection to the earth, to the life force that flows through everything, it's a delicate thing. If you tip the scales too far in one direction, there are repercussions. Ones that you won't be able to undo." Seraphine felt a flicker of fear, something she hadn't experienced in years. The idea of losing control, of letting the power consume her once again, was a thought she had fought to keep buried. But now, with Marcus's words hanging heavy in the air, the fear felt all too real. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I thought I was supposed to be stronger. That was the whole point, wasn't it? To rise above the weakness of the past?" Marcus nodded, but there was no comfort in the gesture. "You are stronger, Seraphine. But strength comes with responsibility. And that's something you need to grasp before it's too late." Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed through the air, followed by the sharp crack of thunder. The wind picked up, howling around them as the storm began to intensify, the night darkening further as the clouds gathered above. Seraphine looked up, her senses alert. The storm wasn't natural. The air felt thick, charged with something foreign, something malevolent. "I think we've already pushed the balance too far," Marcus said quietly. "Something's coming. Something that's been tracking the power you've unleashed." Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "It's hard to explain. There are ancient entities, powerful beings that have existed long before any vampire clan, long before the first human civilizations. These creatures feed off of the power you've awakened. And they're not going to let you control it for long. Fear gripped Seraphine's chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. What do we do? Marcus's eyes darkened. We need to prepare. These beings, they aren't like anything you've ever faced before. They won't be deterred by your strength. They'll come for you. And they won't stop until they have what they want. Seraphine turned back to the horizon, her mind racing. She could feel the power inside her, pulsing more intensely now, as if it were responding to the approaching threat. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. I won't let them take it from me, she said firmly, her voice like steel. This is mine. I won't let anyone take what I've earned. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes softening. I know you won't. But you have to understand something, Seraphine. This isn't just about your strength. It's about how far you're willing to go to protect it. To protect the balance. She turned to him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent centuries in the shadows, running from her past, hiding from the truth of what she was. But now, the time had come to face the consequences of what she had become. I'll fight them, Seraphine said with quiet determination. I'll protect what's mine. Marcus nodded, his gaze proud. Then let's get ready. They won't stop until they have you, and if they succeed. He didn't finish the sentence, but Seraphine didn't need him to. She understood. If they succeeded, she would lose not just the power she had awakened, but her very identity. Her place in the world would be erased, her existence rewritten. And she would never let that happen. The storm raged above them, the first crack of lightning illuminating the night sky. Seraphine felt the power inside her rise to meet it, ready to face whatever came next. Whatever it took, she would protect herself. And she would protect Marcus, the one person who had helped her find the strength to become something more. Because now she knew the truth. The power she had awakened was hers to command. And no one, not even the ancient beings that had watched the world for millennia, could take it from her. The reckoning ****. The storm had reached its peak. Seraphine could feel it in her bones, the unnatural power that crackled through the air, thick with the promise of a confrontation. The city below her was drowned in darkness, the streets empty, the hum of life stilled in. Anticipation of what was to come. Every fiber of her being thrummed with energy, the power inside her pulsing in perfect synchrony with the tempest above. She stood on the edge of the rooftop, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the first traces of movement began to materialize in the sky. Marcus stood beside her, his presence unwavering. His face was tense, his eyes scanning the distant horizon with a mixture of concern and resolve. He had prepared her for this moment, had told her that the ancient beings would come for her, drawn to the power she had unleashed. But now that the moment was upon them, even he seemed uneasy. The air itself felt thick, oppressive, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for the final act. They're coming, Marcus said quietly, his voice strained with urgency. We don't have much time. Seraphine nodded, her fists clenched at her sides. The power within her stirred restlessly, as if it too could sense the impending battle. She had trained herself for this moment, had honed her abilities under Marcus's watchful eye. But even with everything she had learned, she knew this would be unlike anything she had faced before. The sky above them twisted, the clouds swirling in unnatural patterns. A crack of thunder split the night, followed by a sudden, unnatural silence. The world seemed to pause, hanging in a delicate balance. And then from the darkened sky they came. Seraphine's heart raced as the first shadow emerged, a massive form, indistinct yet terrifying in its magnitude. It hovered in the air, its presence pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. More shapes appeared beside it, each one more imposing than the last. The ancient beings were here, drawn to her power, their forms shimmering with an eerie, ethereal glow. They were unlike anything she had ever imagined, beings of pure energy and force, their very essence seeming to defy the laws of nature. This is it, Marcus whispered, his voice low and filled with a dangerous resolve. They're here to take what you've awakened. You have to fight them, Seraphine. Don't let them control you. Seraphine's grip tightened around the surge of energy within her. She could feel the raw, untamed force building, threatening to burst free from its confines. The power was hers, and for the first time she knew exactly what she needed to do. This was no longer just about survival. This was about proving that the power she had unlocked could never be taken from her. With a fierce cry, Seraphine surged forward, launching herself into the night air. Her body moved with a speed and grace that was beyond human, propelled by the overwhelming surge of power coursing through her veins. The wind whipped past her, the world blurring as she hurtled toward the first of the ancient beings. The creature was waiting for her. It loomed like a shadow, its form indistinct, its eyes two burning orbs of light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. As Seraphine collided with it, she felt an immediate clash of energies, a shockwave of power that rippled through her body. The creature's energy was unlike anything she had ever encountered, cold, alien, and ancient. But even as its power sought to overpower her, Seraphine fought back, her own strength rising to meet it. She thrust her hands forward, unleashing a blast of raw energy, a surge of power that crackled through the air. The force of the blast hit the creature head-on, sending it tumbling back with a force that shook the very air around them. But the being didn't falter. It reformed in an instant, its ethereal form shifting and reshaping like liquid light. "You cannot control what is beyond you," the creature's voice boomed, reverberating in her mind. It was like a chorus of voices, ancient and timeless, speaking as one. "This power does not belong to you." Seraphine's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve remained unshaken. She had faced down her demons, had fought for her freedom for centuries. She wasn't going to let these beings take what she had earned, not now, not ever. "I don't need to control it," she spat, her voice raw with defiance. "I am it." With that, she unleashed another wave of power, more concentrated this time. It roared through the air, a destructive force that tore through the creature's ethereal form, ripping it apart like paper. The ancient being screamed, its voice a cacophony of pain and fury, before it disintegrated into nothingness, its power fading into the storm. But Seraphine didn't stop. She knew that this was only the beginning. The other beings were closing in, their dark shapes surrounding her, blocking out the moonlight. They were relentless, their purpose singular, to reclaim the power she had stolen. The next being lunged at her, its form twisting and contorting in ways that defied logic. It was faster than the first, its tendrils of energy reaching for her with deadly precision. Seraphine barely had time to react, but she raised her arms in defense, summoning a shield of energy to block the strike. The impact was like being struck by lightning, the force of the blow sending her crashing to the rooftop below. The storm howled around her, the winds whipping her hair around her face. She could feel the creatures closing in, their power overwhelming. They were not just entities, they were primal forces older than anything she could fathom. They were the guardians of the balance she had disturbed, and they would not be satisfied until she had been reduced to nothing. But Seraphine wasn't done yet. She gritted her teeth and rose to her feet, the raw power inside her still surging, still burning. She would not let them win. Not like this. She reached deep inside herself, calling on the full force of the energy that had become a part of her. The air around her seemed to warp and pulse as the power coiled tighter within her. Her body glowed with the raw force of the energy, her eyes alight with an intense, predatory hunger. She had become something more than she had ever been. Something unstoppable. With a roar that shook the heavens, Seraphine released everything she had. A blinding wave of energy erupted from her, a force so pure and raw that it shattered the air around her. The beings screamed in unison as the energy washed over them, their forms dissolving into nothingness, their power crushed beneath the weight of her resolve. But even as the last of the ancient creatures faded into the storm, Seraphine felt the cost of the battle. The power inside her was a force she could no longer control. It had surged too far, too fast, and now it was threatening to consume her. Her body trembled with the effort of holding it back, the storm inside her growing fiercer with every passing second. "Seraphine?" Marcus's voice cut through the haze of her thoughts. She turned to see him standing at the edge of the rooftop, his eyes wide with concern. "You need to stop. It's too much. You're pushing yourself past your limits." But Seraphine couldn't stop. She was beyond stopping now. The power was too great, too all-consuming. It was everything she had become. With one final, desperate cry, she let the energy burst free. The explosion of force tore through the sky, illuminating the night in a blinding flash. The world seemed to implode, the very fabric of reality shaking under the weight of her unleashed power. The storm above them erupted in chaos, the winds howling and twisting, the skies flashing with violent lightning. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Seraphine collapsed to her knees, her body racked with exhaustion. The power inside her was no longer a storm, it was a quiet, steady pulse, a part of her that she could feel but not control. The storm had passed, but the cost had been great. Marcus was at her side in an instant, his hands steady on her shoulders as he helped her to her feet. "You did it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "You fought them off." Seraphine looked up at him, her eyes weary but fierce. I didn't just fight them off, Marcus. I claimed my place in the world. The storm had passed, but Seraphine knew this was only the beginning. The power was hers now, and she would never let anyone take it from her again. The price of power ****. The aftermath of the battle was nothing like Seraphine had expected. The city lay in eerie silence, the storm having passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a strange stillness. The clouds dispersed, and the first faint light of dawn crept over the horizon. A new day was beginning, but for Seraphine, it felt like the end of everything. The battle, the chaos, and the ancient beings were gone, but their presence lingered in the air, as if their final screams had imprinted themselves on the very fabric of the world. She stood on the rooftop, her body still trembling with exhaustion, her energy drained. The power inside her, which had once been so wild and untamable, now simmered beneath her skin, quiet but constant. She could feel it like a living thing pulsing with a life of its own. It was part of her now just as much as the blood in her veins. But it was no longer a force that threatened to consume her. In some strange, twisted way, it had become her ally. Marcus stood beside her, his expression unreadable. He had been by her side through it all, guiding her, pushing her, always there when she needed him most. But now there was a distance between them. The look in his eyes had shifted, no longer filled with admiration or concern, but something more complex. Something Seraphine couldn't quite place. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "You stopped them?" She nodded, but there was no triumph in her heart. No celebration. Only the heavy weight of what had just transpired. The cost of the battle had been more than she had anticipated. She had fought for her power, for her place in the world, but she hadn't anticipated how much of herself she would have to sacrifice to keep it. "I had no choice," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "They would have destroyed me, they would have destroyed everything." Marcus didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His silence made Seraphine's chest tighten, as if something unspoken passed between them. After a long pause he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "It's not just about survival anymore, Seraphine. It's about what comes next. What you do with this power you've claimed." Seraphine turned to him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "You've changed," Marcus said, his gaze meeting hers. "You're no longer the person I met all those months ago, struggling to control something you didn't understand. You've become something more. But power like this doesn't come without consequences. Not just for you but for everyone around you." Seraphine felt a pang of guilt stir within her. She had always known that power came with a price, but she hadn't truly understood what that meant until now. The beings she had fought, those ancient forces, were only the beginning. They were the first of many things that would come for her now. For the power she had awakened. The wind picked up, and Seraphine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite the heat of her internal power. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her, heavier than any burden she had ever carried. The ancient beings had been mere harbingers of something far more dangerous, something that would stop at nothing to take her power from her. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered, the words bitter on her tongue. "I didn't ask to be this, to be what I am now." Marcus placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know. But now that you are, you have to decide how you're going to live with it. The world is different now, Seraphine. And so are you." Her eyes flicked to the city below, the quiet streets, the rooftops stretching into the distance. She had never truly belonged in this world, always lurking in the shadows, always just outside of reach. But now she was something else. Something that no longer hid. "I didn't want to be part of it," she whispered. "I didn't want to belong." Marcus's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his presence a grounding force in the midst of her turmoil. "You can't change what you've become. But you can decide how you use it. The power is yours, yes. But so is the choice of what you do with it." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Seraphine allowed herself to consider the possibility. She had spent so long fighting to survive, to preserve herself from the dangers that lurked in the shadows, that she had never thought about what would come after. What would happen once the fight was over? Now, with everything she had fought for still within her grasp, she realized that the battle didn't end with her victory, it was only just beginning. The world, it seemed, had a way of turning things upside down. Her past, her fears, her isolation, none of it mattered anymore. She had claimed her power, but that meant something more now. It meant responsibility. It meant making a choice. Would she continue to hide from the world as she always had? Or would she step forward and embrace the truth of what she had become? "You're right," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "I can't hide anymore." Marcus smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. No, you can't. Seraphine turned back to the horizon, the storm clouds now completely gone, the sky a brilliant shade of blue, streaked with orange as the sun began to rise. The city below her seemed so small, so fragile, as if she could reach out and break it apart with just a thought. She could feel the weight of the world upon her shoulders now, and she knew that she was no longer just a survivor. She was a force to be reckoned with. For the first time in centuries, Seraphine felt the stirrings of something more than just power inside her. It was a spark of hope, a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for so long. There was a way forward. There had to be. She glanced at Marcus, who was watching her closely, his face unreadable. For a moment their eyes met, and in that silent exchange she understood. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. And whatever lay ahead, whatever choices she had to make, they would be made together. Let's go, she said, her voice steady. It's time to face whatever comes next. Marcus nodded, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. Together. And with that, Seraphine stepped forward, no longer afraid of what she had become, but ready to embrace it. The battle had been won, but the true fight was just beginning. And this time she would fight on her own terms. No longer a creature of the shadows, she would step into the light. The world would never be the same. And neither would she.